Joyce looks up at him, and like a sheet being rippled, fear tugs a corner of the surface of her face. Really, tears seem close. She scampers from him down the hall, the way her mother went. Fled from, Rabbit wanders uneasily in the hall, trying to attach his excited heart to the pictures hanging there. Surfaces of foreign capitals, a woman in white beneath a tree whose every leaf is rimmed in gold, a laborious pen rendering, brick by brick, of the St. John's Episcopal Church, dated 1927 and signed large by Mildred L. Kramer, the letters interlocked artistically. Above a small table halfway down the hall hangs a studio photograph of some old rock with white hair above his ears and a clerical collar, staring over your shoulder as if square into the heart of things. Stuck into the frame is a yellow photograph clipped from a newspaper showing in coarse dots the same old gent gripping a cigar and laughing like a madman with 3 others in robes. He looks a little like Jack, but fatter and stronger. He holds the cigar in a fist. Further on is a colored print of a painted scene in a workshop where the carpenter works in the light given off by his helper's head. The glass this is protected by gives back to Rabbit the shadow of his own head. This half-mirroring glass rejects his attention, which slips back and forth, clinging nowhere. There is a tangy scent in the hallway of spot cleaner, new varnish, mothballs, old wallpaper. He hovers above these possibilities, the man who disappeared. Sexual antagonism begins practically at birth. What a bitch, really. Yet with a nice low flame in her lighting up her legs, those bright white legs. She'd have an anxious little edge and want her own. Cookie, a sharp vanilla cookie. In spite of herself, he loves her. There must be a back stairs, because he next hears Eccles' voice in the kitchen, arguing Joyce into her sweater, asking Lucy if the cake was ruined, explaining, not knowing Rabbit's ears were around the corner, "Don't think this is pleasure for me, it's work." There's no other way to talk to him? He's frightened. Sweetie, everybody's frightened to you, but he's even frightened of me. Well, he came through that door cocky enough. This was the place for, "And he slapped my sweet ass, that's yours to defend." What? Your sweet ass? I'll murder the rogue. I'll call the police. In reality, Lucy's voice stopped at enough, and Eccles is talking about if so-and-so called. Where are those new golf balls? Joyce, you had a cookie 10 minutes ago, and at last calling, in a voice that has healed too smooth over the scratches of their quarrel, "Goodbye." Rabbit pads up the hall and is leaning on the front radiator when Eccles, looking like a young owl, awkward, cross, pops out of the kitchen. They go to his car. Under the threat of rain, the green skin of the Buick has a tropical waxiness. Eccles lights a cigarette, and they go down, across Route 422, into the valley toward the golf course. Eccles says, after getting several deep drags settled in his chest, "So your trouble isn't really lack of religion, huh?" I was remembering our other conversation about the waterfall in the tree. Yeah, well, I stole that from Mickey Mouse. Eccles laughs, puzzled. Rabbit notices how his mouth stays open after he laughs, the little inturned rows of teeth waiting a moment while his eyebrows go up and down expectantly. "It stopped me short," he admits, closing this flirtatious cave. "Then you said you know what's inside you. I've been wondering all weekend what that was. Can you tell me?" Rabbit doesn't want to tell him anything. The more he tells, the more he loses. He's safe inside his own skin. He doesn't want to come out. This guy's whole game is to get him out into the open where he can be manipulated. But the fierce convention of courtesy pries open Rabbit's lips. "Hell, it's nothing much," he says. "It's just that, well, it's all there is. Don't you think?" Eccles nods and blinks and drives without saying a word. The trap is there waiting. Damn him. He's so sure I'll come down the path. "How's Janice now?" Rabbit asks. Eccles is startled to feel him veer off. "I dropped by Monday morning to tell them you were in the county. Your wife was in the backyard with your boy, and what I took to be an old girlfriend, a Mrs. Foster Fogelman." "What did she look like?" "I don't really know. I was distracted by her sunglasses. They were the mirror kind, with very wide side pieces." "Oh, Peggy Gring, that moron. She married that hick Morris Fosnacht. Fosnacht, that's right, like the donut. I knew there was something very local about the name. You'd never heard of Fosnacht Day before you came here? Never, not in Norwalk. The thing I remember about it, when I was, I must have been 6 or 7 because he died in 1940, my grandfather would wait upstairs until I came down so I wouldn't be the Fosnacht. He lived with us then. He hasn't thought or spoken of his grandfather in years, it seems. A mild, dry taste comes into his mouth. What was the penalty for being a Fosnacht? I forget. It was just something you didn't want to be. Wait, I remember. One year I was the last downstairs and my parents or somebody teased me and I didn't like it. And I guess I cried, I don't know. Anyway, that's why the old man stayed up. He was your father's father? My mother's. He lived with us. I remember my father's father, Eccles says. He used to come to Connecticut and have dreadful arguments with my father. My grandfather was the Bishop of Providence and had kept his church from going under to the Unitarians by becoming almost Unitarian himself. He used to call himself a Darwinian deist. My father, in reaction, I suppose, became very orthodox, almost Anglo-Catholic. He loved Belloc and Chesterton. In fact, he used to read to us those poems you heard my wife objecting to. About the lion? Yes. Belloc has this bitter mocking streak my wife can't appreciate. He mocks children, which she can't forgive. It's her psychology. Children are very sacred in psychology. Where was I? Yes, along with his watered-down theology, my grandfather had kept in his religious practice a certain color and a rigor that my father had lost. Grandpa felt Daddy was extremely remiss in not having a family worship service every night. My father would say he didn't want to bore his children the way he had been bored with God, and anyway, what was the good of worshiping a jungle god in the living room? You don't think God is in the woods, my grandfather would say, just behind stained glass, and so on. My brothers and I used to tremble, because it put Daddy in a terrible depression, ultimately, to argue with him. You know how it is with fathers. You never get rid of the idea that maybe, after all, they're right. A little dried-up old man with a Yankee accent who was really awfully dear. I remember he used to grab us by the knee at meal times with this brown, bony hand and croak, "Has he made you believe in hell?" Harry laughs. Eccles' imitation is good. Being an old man fits him. Did he? Do you? Yes, I think so. Hell as Jesus described it, as separation from God. Well, then we're all more or less in it. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I don't think even the blackest atheist has an idea of what real separation will be. Outer darkness. What we live in, you might call, he looks at Harry and laughs, inner darkness. Eccles volunteering all this melts Rabbit's caution. He wants to bring something of himself into the space between them, the excitement of friendship, a competitive excitement that makes him lift his hands and jiggle them as if thoughts were basketballs, presses him to say, "Well, I don't know all this about theology, but I'll tell you, I do feel, I guess, that somewhere behind all this." He gestures outward at the scenery. They are passing the housing development this side of the golf course. Half wood, half brick, 1.5 stories in little flat bulldozed yards, with tricycles and spindly 3-year-old trees, the ungrandest landscape in the world. There's something that wants me to find it. Eccles tamps out his cigarette carefully in the tiny cross-notched cup in the car ashtray. Of course, all vagrants think they're on a quest, at least at first. Rabbit doesn't see, after trying to give the man something, that he deserves this slap. He supposes this is what ministers need, to cut everybody down to the same miserable size. He says, well, I guess that makes your friend Jesus look pretty foolish. Mention of the holy name incites pink spots high on Eccles' cheeks. He did say, the minister says, that saints shouldn't marry. They turn off the road and go up the winding drive to the clubhouse, a big cinder block building fronted with a long sign that has Chestnut Grove Golf Course lettered between 2 Coca-Cola insignia. When Harry caddied here, it was just a clapboard shack holding a wood-burning stove and charts of old tournaments, and 2 armchairs and a counter for candy bars and golf balls you fished out of the swamp, and that Mrs. Wenrick resold. He supposes Mrs. Wenrick is dead. She was a delicate old rouged widow like a doll with white hair, and it always seemed funny to hear talk about greens and turf and tourneys and par come out of her mouth. Eccles parks the Buick on the asphalt lot and says, "Before I forget." Rabbit's hand is on the door handle. "What? Do you want a job?" "What kind?" "A parishioner of mine, a Mrs. Horace Smith, has about 8 acres of garden around her home, towards Appleboro. Her husband was an incredible rhododendron enthusiast. I shouldn't say incredible. He was a terribly dear old man." "I don't know anything about gardening." "Nobody does. That's what Mrs. Smith says. There are no gardeners left. For $40 a week, I believe her." $1 an hour? That's pretty poor. It wouldn't be 40 hours. Flexible time. That's what you want, isn't it? Flexibility? So you can be free to preach to the multitudes? Eccles really does have a mean streak, him and Belloc. Without the collar around his throat, he kind of lets go. Rabbit gets out of the car. Eccles does the same, and his head across the top of the car looks like a head on a platter. The wide mouth moves. "Please consider it." "I can't. I may not even stay in the county." "Is the girl going to kick you out?" "What girl?" "What is her name? Leonard? Ruth Leonard?" "Well, aren't you smart?" Who could have told him? Peggy Gring, by way of Totherow? More likely Tothero's girl. What's her name? She looked like Janice. It doesn't matter. The world's such a web anyway, things just trickle through. "I never heard of her," Rabbit says. The head on the platter grins weirdly in the sun glare off the metal. They walk side by side to the cement block clubhouse. On the way, Eccles remarks, "It's the strange thing about you mystics, how often your little ecstasies wear a skirt." "Say, I didn't have to show up today, you know." "I know. Forgive me. I'm in a very depressed mood." There's nothing exactly wrong with his saying this, but it rubs Harry's inner hair the wrong way. It kind of clings. It says, "Pity me, love me." The prickly sensation makes his lips sticky. He is unable to open them to respond. When Eccles pays his way, he can scarcely negotiate thanking him. When they pick out a set of clubs for him to rent, he is so indifferent and silent, the freckled kid in charge stares at him as if he's a moron. As he and Eccles walk together toward the first tee, he feels partially destroyed, like a good horse yoked to a pulpy hoofed nag. Eccles' presence drags at him so decidedly, he has to fight leaning toward that side. And the ball feels it too, the ball he hits after a little advice from Eccles. It sputters away to one side, crippled by a perverse topspin that makes it fall from flight as dumpily as a blob of clay. Eccles laughs. "That's the best first drive I ever saw." "It's not a first drive. I used to hit the ball around when I was a caddy. I should do better than that." "You expect too much of yourself. Watch me. That'll make you feel better." Rabbit stands back and is surprised to see Eccles, who has a certain spring in his unconscious movements, swing with a quaint 50-year-old stiffness, as if he had a pot to keep out of the way. He punches the ball with weak solidity. It goes straight, though high and weak, and he seems delighted with it. He fairly prances into the fairway. Harry trails after him heavily. The soggy turf, raw and wet from recently thawing, sinks beneath his big suede shoes. They're on a seesaw. Eccles goes up, he comes down. Down in the pagan groves and green alleys of the course, Eccles is transformed. Brainless gaiety animates him. He laughs and swings and clucks and calls. Harry stops hating him. He himself is so awful. Ineptitude seems to coat him like a scabrous disease. He is grateful to Eccles for not fleeing from him. Often Eccles, 50 yards further on, he has an excited, gleeful habit of running ahead, comes all the way back to find a ball Harry has lost. Somehow Rabbit can't tear his attention from where the ball should have gone, the little ideal napkin of clipped green, pinked with a pretty flag. His eyes can't keep with where it did go. "Here it is," Eccles says, "behind a root. You're having terrible luck." "This must be a nightmare for you." "Not at all, not at all. You're extremely promising. You've never played, and yet you haven't once missed the ball completely." This does it. He aims, and in the murderous strength of his desire to knock it out in spite of the root, he misses the ball completely. "Your only mistake is trying to use your height," Eccles says. "You have a beautiful natural swing." Rabbit whacks again, and the ball flops out and wobbles a few yards. "Bend to the ball," Eccles says. "Imagine you're about to sit down." "I'm about to lie down," Harry says. He feels sick, giddily sick, sucked deeper into a vortex whose upper rim is marked by the tranquil tips of the leafing trees. He seems to remember having been up there once. He skids into puddles, is swallowed by trees, infallibly sinks into the mangy scruff at the sides of the fairways. Nightmare is the word. In waking life, only animate things slither and jerk for him this way. He's always had a touch with objects. His unreal hacking dazes his brain. Half hypnotized, it plays tricks whose strangeness dawns on him slowly. In his head, he talks to the clubs as if they're women. The irons, light and thin, yet somehow treacherous in his hands, are Janice. "Come on, you dope, be calm. Here we go, easy." When the slotted club face gouges the dirt behind the ball, and the shock jolts up his arms to his shoulders, his thought is that Janice has struck him. Oh, dumb, really dumb. Screw her, just screw her. Anger turns his skin rotten, so the outside seeps through. His insides go jagged with the tiny dry forks of bitter scratching brambles, the brittle silver shaft one more stick, where words hang like caterpillar nests that can't be burned away. She stubs fat, she stubs the dirt, torn open in a rough brown mouth. Dirt stubs fat. With the woods, the she is Ruth, holding a 3-wood, absorbed in its heavy reddish head and grass-stained face and white stripe prettily along the edge. He thinks, okay, if you're so smart, and clinches and swirls. Ah! When she tumbles so easily, to balk this. The mouth of torn grass, and the ball runs, hops and hops, hides in a bush, white tail. And when he walks there, the bushes damn somebody, his mother. He lifts the huffy branches like shirts, in a fury of shame, but with care not to break any. And these branches bother his legs while he tries to pour his will down into the hard, irreducible pellet that is not really himself yet, in a way is. Just the way it sits there in the center of everything. As the 7-iron chops down, "Please, Janice, just once." Awkwardness spiders at his elbows, and the ball, as he stares with bitten elbows, hooks with dismal slowness into more sad scruff further on, the khaki color of Texas. Oh, you moron, go home. Home is the whole. And above, in the scheme of the unhappy vision that frets his conscious attention with an almost optical overlay of presences, the mild gray rain sky is his grandfather waiting upstairs so that Harry will not be a Fasnacht. And now at the corners, now at the center of this striving dream, Eccles flits in his grubby shirt like a white flag of forgiveness, crying encouragement, fluttering from the green to guide him home. The greens, still dead from the winter, are salted with a dry dirt. Fertilizer? The ball slips along, making bits of grit jump. "Don't stab your putts," Eccles says. "A little easy swing, arms stiff. Distance is more important than aim on the first putt. Try again." He kicks the ball back. It took Harry about 12 to get up here on the 4th green, but this smug assumption that his strokes are past counting irritates him. "Come on, sweet," he pleads with his wife. "There's the hole, big as a bucket. Everything is all right." But no, she has to stab in a panicked way. What was she afraid of? Too much. The ball goes maybe 5 feet past. Walking toward Eccles, he says, "You never did tell me how Janice is." "Janice?" Eccles, with an effort, drags his attention up from the game. He is absolutely in love with winning. He is eating me up, Harry thinks. "She seemed in good spirits on Monday. She was out in the backyard with this other woman, and they were both giggling when I came out. You must realize that for a little while, now that she's adjusted somewhat, she'll probably enjoy being back with her parents. It's her own version of your irresponsibility." "Actually," Harry says gratingly, squatting to line up the putt the way they do it on television, "she can't stand her parents any more than I can. She probably wouldn't have married me if she hadn't been in such a hurry to get away from him. His putt slides past on the downside and goes 2 or 3 fucking feet too far. 4 feet. Eccles sinks his. The ball wobbles up and with a glottal rattle bobbles in. The minister looks up with the light of triumph in his eyes. "Harry," he asks, sweetly yet boldly, "why have you left her? You're obviously deeply involved with her." "I told you, there was this thing that wasn't there." "What thing? Have you ever seen it? Are you sure it exists?" Harry's 2-foot putt dribbles short, and he picks up the ball with trembling fingers. "Well, if you're not sure it exists, don't ask me. It's right up your alley. If you don't know, nobody does." "No," Eccles cries in the same strained voice in which he told his wife to keep her heart open for grace. "Christianity isn't looking for a rainbow. If it were what you think it is, we'd pass out opium at services. We're trying to serve God, not be God." They pick up their bags and walk the way a wooden arrow tells them. Eccles goes on explanatorily. "This was all settled centuries ago in the heresies of the early church. I tell you, I know what it is." "What is it? What is it?" "Is it hard or soft, Harry? Is it blue? Is it red? Does it have polka dots?" It hits Rabbit depressingly that he really wants to be told. Underneath all this, "I know more about it than you," heresies of the early church business, he really wants to be told about it, wants to be told that it is there, that he's not lying to all those people every Sunday. As if it's not enough to be trying to get some sense out of this frigging game, you have to carry around this madman trying to swallow your soul. The hot strap of the bag gnaws his shoulder. "The truth is," Eccles tells him with womanish excitement, in a voice agonized by embarrassment, "you're monstrously selfish. You're a coward. You don't care about right or wrong. You worship nothing except your own worst instincts." They reach the tee, a platform of turf beside a hunchbacked fruit tree, offering fists of taut pale buds. "I better go first," Rabbit says, "till you calm down." His heart is hushed, held in mid-beat by anger. He doesn't care about anything except getting out of this mess. He wishes it would rain. In avoiding looking at Eccles, he looks at the ball, which sits high on the tee and already seems free of the ground. Very simply, he brings the club head around his shoulder into it. The sound has a hollowness, a singleness he hasn't heard before. His arms force his head up, and his ball is hung way out, lunarly pale against the beautiful black blue of storm clouds, his grandfather's color stretched dense across the east. It recedes along a line straight as a ruler edge, stricken, sphere, star, speck. It hesitates, and Rabbit thinks it will die, but he's fooled, for the ball makes this hesitation the ground of a final leap. With a kind of visible sob, takes a last bite of space before vanishing and falling. "That's it," he cries, and turning to Eccles with a smile of aggrandizement, repeats, "That's it." Sun and moon, time goes. In Mrs. Smith's acres, crocuses break the crust. Daffodils and narcissi unpack their trumpets. The reviving grass harbors violets, and the lawn is suddenly coarse with dandelions and broad-leaved weeds. Invisible rivulets running brokenly make the lowland of the estate sing. The flower beds, bordered with bricks buried diagonally, are pierced by dull red spikes that will be peonies, and the earth itself, scumbled, stone-flecked, horny, raggedly patched with damp and dry, looks like the oldest and smells like the newest thing under heaven. The shaggy golden suds of blooming forsythia glow through the smoke that fogs the garden, while Rabbit burns rakings of crumpled stalks, perished grass, oak leaves shed in the dark privacy of winter, and rosebush prunings that cling together in infuriating ankle-clawing clumps. These brush piles, ignited soon after he arrives, crusty-eyed and tasting coffee in the midst of the webs of dew, are still damply smoldering when he leaves, making ghosts in the night behind him as his footsteps crunch on the spalls of the Smith driveway. All the way back to Brewer in the bus he smells the warm ashes. Funny, for these 2 months he never has to cut his fingernails. He lops, lifts, digs. He plants annuals, packets the old lady gives him, nasturtiums, poppies, sweet peas, petunias. He loves folding the hoed ridge of crumbs of soil over the seeds. Sealed, they cease to be his. The simplicity, getting rid of something by giving it. God himself folded into the tiny adamant structure, self-destined to a succession of explosions, the great slow gathering out of water and air and silicon, felt without words in the turn of the round hoe handle in his palms. Now, after the magnolias have lost their grip, but before any but the leaves of the maple have the breadth to cast deep shade, the cherry trees and crab apples, and, in a remote corner of the grounds, a solitary plum tree ball with bloom. A whiteness the black limbs seem to gather from the blowing clouds, and after a moment hurl away, so the reviving grass is bleached by an astonishing storm of confetti. Fragrant of gasoline, the power mower chews the petals, the lawn digests them. The lilac bushes bloom by the fallen tennis court fences. Birds come to the bird bath. Busy one morning with a crescent-shaped edger, Harry is caught in a tide of perfume, for behind him the breeze has turned and washes down through a thick, sloping bank of acrid lily-of-the-valley leaves, in which on that warm night 1,000 bells have ripened. The high ones on the stem still the bitter sherbet green of cantaloupe rind. Apple trees and pear trees. Tulips. Those ugly purple tatters, the iris. And at last, prefaced by azaleas, the rhododendrons themselves, with a profusion increasing through the last week of May. Rabbit had waited all spring for this crowning. The bushes had puzzled him. They were so big, almost trees, some twice his height, and there seemed so many. They were planted all along the edges of the towering, droop-limbed spruces that sheltered the place, and in the acres sheltered there were dozens of great rectangular clumps like loaves of porous green bread. The bushes were evergreen, with their zigzag branches and long leaves fingering in every direction. They seemed to belong to a different climate, to a different land whose gravity pulled softer than this one. When the first blooms came, they were like the single big flower Oriental prostitutes wear on the sides of their heads, on the covers of the paperback spy stories Ruth reads. But when the hemispheres of blossom appear in crowds, they remind him of nothing so much as the hats worn by cheap girls to church on Easter. Harry has often wanted and never had a girl like that, a little Catholic from a shabby house, dressed in flashy bargain clothes. In the swarthy leaves under the pert, soft cap of 5-petaled flowers, he can imagine her face, with its plucked eyebrows, its little black nostrils round as buttons, its eyes made surly by nuns. He can almost smell her perfume as she passes him on the concrete cathedral steps, head bowed, her mincing legs tucked into her tailored suit. Intent on prayer, she has a dumb girl's sweet, piercing way of putting her whole body into one thing at a time. Close, he can go so close to the petals. Each flower wears on the roof of its mouth 2 fans of freckles where the anthers tap. He can smell her. At this climax of her late husband's garden, Mrs. Smith comes out of the house and on Rabbit's arm walks deep into the rhododendron plantation. A woman once of some height, she is bent small, and the lingering strands of black look dirty in her white hair. She carries a cane, but in forgetfulness, perhaps, hangs it over her forearm and totters along with it dangling loose, like an outlandish bracelet. Her method of gripping her gardener is this. He crooks his right arm, pointing his elbow toward her shoulder, and she shakily brings her left forearm up within his and bears down heavily on his wrist with her lumpish and freckled fingers. Her hold is like that of a vine to a wall. One good pull will destroy it, but otherwise it will survive all weathers. He feels her body jolt with every step, and every word twitches her head. Not that the effort of speaking is so great. It is the excitement of communication that seizes her, wrinkling the arch of her nose fiercely, making her lips snarl above her snaggle teeth with a comic over-expressiveness that is self-conscious, like the funny faces made by a 13-year-old girl in constant confession of the fact that she is not beautiful. She sharply tips her head to look up at Harry, and in tiny brown sockets afflicted by creases like so many drawstrings, her cracked blue eyes bulge frantically with captive life as she speaks. "Oh, I don't like Mrs. R.S. Holford. She always looks so washed out and flossy to me. Harry loved those salmon colors so. I'd say to him, 'If I want red, give me red, a fat red rose. And if I want white, give me white, a tall white lily. And don't bother me with all these in-betweens and would-be pinks and almost purples that don't know what their mind is. Rhodie's a mealy-mouthed plant,' I'd say to Harry. 'She doesn't have a brain, so she gives you some of everything, just to tease him.' But in truth I meant it. The thought seems to strike her. She stops dead on the path of grass, and her eyes, the irises a kind of broken glass white within rings of persisting blue, roll nervously, looking from one side of him to the other. In truth, I meant every word of it. I'm a farmer's daughter, Mr. Angstrom, and I would have rather seen this land gone under to alfalfa. I'd say to him, 'Why don't you plant buckwheat if you must fuss in the ground? Now there's a real crop. You raise the wheat, I'll bake the bread.' I would have, too. What do we want with all these corsages that after they're gone we have to look at their ugly leaves all the year round?" I'd say to him. "What pretty girl are you growing these for?" He was younger than I. That's why I took advantage of my right to tease him. I won't say by how much. "What are we standing here for? Old body like mine? Stand still in one place, you'll be rooted fast." She jabs the cane into the grass, his signal to extend his arm. They move on down the alley of bloom. Never thought I'd outlive him. That was his weakness. Come in out of the garden, he'd be forever sitting. A farmer's daughter never learns the meaning of sit. Her unsteady touch on his wrist bobs like the swaying tops of the giant spruces. He associates these trees with forbidden estates. It gives him pleasure to be within their protection. "Ah, now here is a plant." They stop at a corner, and she lifts her dangling cane toward a small rhododendron clothed in pink of penetrating purity, a color through whose raw simplicity, as through stained glass, you seem to look into the ideal subsoil of reality. "Harry's Bianchi," Mrs. Smith says, "the only rhodie except some of the whites. I forget their names, silly things anyway, that says what it means. It's the only true pink there is. When Harry first got it, he set it among the other so-called pinks, and it showed them up as just so muddy he tore them out and backed the Bianchi with crimsons. The crimsons are by, aren't they? Is today June?" Her wild eyes fix him crazily, and her grip tightens. "I don't know. I don't think so. Memorial Day is next Saturday." "Oh, I remember so well the day we got that silly plant. Hot. We drove to New York City to take it off the boat and put it in the back seat of the Packard like a favorite aunt or some such thing. It came in a big blue wooden tub of earth. There was only one nursery in England that carried the stock, and it cost $200 to ship. A man came down to the hold to water it every day. Hot. And all that vile traffic through Jersey City and Trenton, and this scrawny bush sitting in its blue tub in the back seat like a prince of the realm. There weren't any of these turnpikes then, so it was a good 6-hour trip to New York. The middle of the Depression, and it looked like everybody in the world owned an automobile. You came over the Delaware at Burlington. This was before the war. I don't suppose when I say the war, you know which one I mean. You probably think of that Korean thing as the war. No, I think of the war as World War II. So do I. So do I. Do you really remember it? Sure. I mean, I was pretty old. I flattened tin cans and bought war stamps, and we got awards at grade school. Our son was killed. Gee, I'm sorry. Oh, he was old. He was old. He was almost 40. They made him an officer right off. Still, I know. You think of only young men being killed. Yeah, you do. It was a good war. It wasn't like the first. It was ours to win, and we won it. All wars are hateful things, but that one was satisfying to win. She gestures with her cane again at the pink plant. The day we came over from the boat docks, it of course wasn't in flower that late in the summer, so it looked like just foolishness to me to have it riding in the back seat like a... She realizes she is repeating herself, falters, but goes on, like a prince of the realm. In her almost transparent blue eyes, there is pinned this little sharpness watching his face to see if he smiles at her addlement. Seeing nothing, she snaps roughly, "It's the only one." "The only Bianchi?" "Yes, right. There's not another in the United States. There's not another good pink from the Golden Gate to whatever. The Brooklyn Bridge, I suppose they say. All the truly good pink in the nation is right here under our eyes. A florist from Lancaster took some cuttings, but they died. Probably smothered them in lime. Stupid man. A Greek." She claws at his arm and moves on more heavily and rapidly. The sun is high, and she probably feels a need for the house. Bees swim in the foliage. Hidden birds scold. The tide of leaf has overtaken the tide of blossom, and a furtively bitter smell breathes from the fresh walls of green. Maples, birches, oaks, elms, and horse-chestnut trees compose a thin forest that runs at a varying depth along the far property line. In the damp, shaded fringe between the lawn and this copse, the rhododendrons are still putting forth, but the unsheltered clumps in the center of the lawn have already dropped petals in oddly neat rows along the edge of the grass paths. "I don't like it. I don't like it," Mrs. Smith says, hobbling with Rabbit down such a trench of overblown brilliance. "I appreciate the beauty, but I'd rather see alfalfa. A woman? I don't know why it should vex me so. Horace used to encourage the neighbors to come in and see the place in blooming time. He was like a child in many ways. This woman, Mrs. Foster, from down the hill in a little orange shack with a metal cat climbing up the shutters, used to invariably say, turn to me with lipstick halfway up to her nose and say," she mimics a too-sweet voice with a spirited spite that shakes her frame, "My, Mrs. Smith, this must be what heaven is like." One year I said to her, I couldn't hold my tongue any longer, I said, "Well, if I'm driving 6 miles back and forth to St. John's Episcopal Church every Sunday just to get into another splash of roadies, I might as well save the mileage because I don't want to go." Now, wasn't that a dreadful thing for an old sinner to say? Oh, I don't know. To this poor woman who was only trying to be civil, hadn't a bean of a brain in her head, of course, painting her face like a young fool. She's passed on now, poor soul. Alma Foster passed on 2 or 3 winters back. Now she knows the truth, and I don't. Well, maybe what looks like rhododendrons to her will look like alfalfa to you. Exactly. You know, Mr. Angstrom, it's such a pleasure. She stops them in the walk and caresses his forearm awkwardly. In the sunshine, the tiny tan landscape of her face tips up toward his, and in her gaze, beneath the fumbling girlish flirtatiousness and the watery wonder, there glitters the edge of an old acuteness, so that Rabbit, standing there uneasily, feels a stab of the unkind force that drove Mr. Smith out to the brainless flowers. "You and I, we think alike, don't we? Now, don't we?" "You have it pretty good, don't you?" Ruth asks him. They have gone on the afternoon of this Memorial Day to the public swimming pool in West Brewer. She was self-conscious about getting into a bathing suit, but in fact she looks great, up to her thighs in turquoise water and soaked licks of red hair sneaking out of her bathing cap. She swims easily, her big legs kicking slowly and the water flowing in bubbling transparence over her shoulders, and her clean arms lifting and her back and bottom shimmering black under the jiggled green. Sometimes, when she stops and floats a moment, putting her face down in the water in a motion that quickens his heart with its slight danger, her bottom of its own buoyance floats up and breaks the surface, Nothing much, just a round black island glistening there, a clear image suddenly in the water wavering like a bluey television set. But the solid sight swells his heart with pride, makes him harden all over with a chill clench of ownership. His. She is his. He knows her as well as the water, like the water has been everywhere on her body. When she does the backstroke, the water breaks and pours down her front into her breast cups, flooding her breasts with touch. The arch of her submerged body tightens, thrusting her breasts fitfully into the air. She closes her eyes and moves blindly. Two skinny boys, dabbling at the shallow end of the pool, splash away from her head-first approach. She brushes one with a back sweep of her arm, awakes and squats, smiling in the water. Her arms wave bonelessly to keep her balance in the nervous tides of the crowded pool. The air sparkles with the scent of chlorine. He rejoices in how clean she feels. Clean, clean. What is it? Nothing touching you that is not yourself. Her and water, him and grass and air. Her head, bobbing like a hollow ball, makes a face at him. Himself, he is not a water animal. Wet is cold to him. Having got wet, he prefers to sit on the tile edge, dangling his feet, and imagining that high school girls behind him are admiring the muscle play of his broad back. He revolves his shoulders thoughtfully, and feels the blades stretch his skin in the sun. Ruth wades to the end, through water so shallow the checker pattern of the pool floor is refracted to its surface. She climbs the little ladder, shedding water in great grape bunches. He scrambles back to their blanket and lies down so that when she comes over, he can see her standing above him as big as the sky, the black hair high on the insides of her thighs, pasted into swirls by the water. She tears off her cap and shakes out her hair and bends over for the towel. Water on her back flows upwards down soft valleys of fat and drips over her shoulders. As he watches her rub her arms, the smell of grass comes up through the blanket, and shouts make the crystalline air vibrate. She lies down beside him and closes her eyes and submits to the sun. Her face, seen so close, is built of great flats of skin pressed clean of color by the sun, except for a burnish of yellow that adds to their size mineral weight, the weight of some pure ungrained stone carted straight from quarries to temples. Words come from this monumental Ruth in the same scale, as massive wheels rolling to the porches of his ears, as mute coins spinning in the light. You have it pretty good. How so? Oh, her words seem slightly delayed in passage from her lips. He sees them move and then hears, "Look at all you've got. You've got Eccles to play golf with every week and to keep your wife from chasing you. You've got your flowers, and you've got Mrs. Smith in love with you. You've got me." "You think she really is in love with me, Mrs. Smith?" "All I know is what I get from you. You say she is." "No, I never actually said that, did I?" She doesn't bother to answer him out of her huge face, magnified by his drowsy contentment. Chalk highlights run along her tanned skin. He repeats, "Did I?" and pinches her arm hard. He hadn't meant to do it so hard. Something angered him at the touch of her skin, her sullenness. "Ow, you son of a bitch!" Still she lies there, paying more attention to the sun than him. He gets up on an elbow and looks across her dead body to the lighter figures of two 16-year-olds, standing sipping orange crush from cardboard cones. The one in a white strapless peeks up at him from her straw with a brown glance, her skinny legs dark as a Negro's, her hip bones making gaunt peaks on either side of her slanted, flat belly. "Oh, all the world loves you," Ruth says suddenly. "What I wonder is why." "I'm lovable," he says. "I mean, why the hell you? What's so special about you?" "I'm a mystic," he says. "I give people faith." Eccles has told him this. Once with a laugh, probably meaning it sarcastically. You never knew what Eccles was really meaning. You had to take what you wanted. Rabbit took this to heart. He never would have thought of it himself. He doesn't think much about what he gives other people. "You give me a pain," she says. Well, I'll be damned. The injustice, after he was so proud of her in the pool, loved her so much. What in hell makes you think you don't have to pull your own weight? What's your kick? I support you. The hell you do. I have a job. It's true. A little after he went to work for Mrs. Smith, she got a job as a stenographer with an insurance company that has a branch in Brewer. He wanted her to. He was nervous about how she'd spend her afternoons with him away. She said she never enjoyed that business. He wasn't so sure. She wasn't exactly suffering when he met her. "Quit it," he says. "I don't care. Sit around all day reading mysteries. I'll support you." "You'll support me? If you're so big, why don't you support your wife?" "Why should I? Her father's rolling in it." "You're so smug is what gets me. Don't you ever think you're going to have to pay a price?" She looks at him now, squarely with eyes bloodshot from being in the water. She shades them with her hand. These aren't the eyes he met that night by the parking meters. Flat, pale discs like a doll might have. The blue of her irises has deepened inward and darkened with a richness that, singing the truth to his instincts, disturbs him. These eyes sting her, and she turns her head away to hide the tears, thinking, that's one of the signs, crying easily. God, at work she has to get up from the typewriter and rush into the John like she had the runs and sob, sob, sob. Standing there in a booth looking down at a toilet, laughing at herself and sobbing till her chest hurts. And sleepy. God, after coming back from lunch, it's all she can do to keep from stretching out in the aisle right there on the filthy floor between Lily Orff and Rita Fioravante, where that old horse's neck Honig would have to step over her. And hungry. For lunch, an ice cream soda with the sandwich, and then a donut with the coffee. And still she has to buy a candy bar at the cash register. After she's been trying to slim down for him and had lost 6 pounds, at least one scale said. For him, that's what was rich, changing herself for him when he was worth nothing, less than nothing. He was a menace, for all his mildness. He had that mildness. The others didn't. The thing was, when they knew you were one, they didn't think you were human, and thought they were entitled. Which they were, but still, some of the things. It was like they hated women and used her. But now she forgives them because it all melts. The next day is the next day, and you're still the same, and they're away. The older they were, the more like presidents they looked, the wiser they should have been, the worse they were. Then they wanted some business their wives wouldn't give. In from the back, which she didn't mind. It was like being 100 miles away once you get adjusted. Or with the mouth. That. What do they see in it? It can't be as deep. She doesn't know. After all, it's no worse than them at your B's, and why not be generous? The first time it was Harrison, and she was drunk as a monkey anyway. But when she woke up the next morning, wondered what the taste in her mouth was. But that was just being a superstitious kid. There isn't much taste to it. A little like seawater. Just harder work than they probably think. Women are always working harder than they think. The thing was, they wanted to be admired there. They really did want that. They weren't that ugly, but they thought they were. That was the thing that surprised her in high school, how ashamed they really were. How grateful they were if you just touched them there, and how quick word got around that you would. What did they think? They were monsters? If they'd just thought, they might have known you were curious too, that you could like that strangeness there like they liked yours. No worse than women in their way. All red wrinkles, my God. What was it in the end? No mystery. That was the great thing she discovered, that it was no mystery. Just a stuck-on looking bit that made them king. And if you went along with it, could be good. And anyway, put you with them against those others, those little snips running around her at hockey in the gym like a cow in that blue uniform like a baby suit. She wouldn't wear it in the 12th grade and took the demerits. God, she hated some of those girls. But she got it back at night, taking that urgency they didn't know existed like a queen. Boy, there wasn't any fancy business then. You didn't even need to take off your clothes, just a little rubbing through the cloth. Your mouths tasting of the onion on the hamburgers you just had at the diner, and the car heater ticking as it cooled through all the cloth, everything. Off they'd go. They couldn't have felt much. It must have been just the idea of you. All their ideas. Sometimes just French kissing. Not that she ever really got with that. Sloppy tongues and nobody can breathe. But all of a sudden you knew from the way their lips went hard and opened and then eased shut and away that it was over. That there was no more push for you, and you better back off if you wanted to keep your dress dry. That made you dirty. You, their stickum. They couldn't forgive her that. Her forgiving them, she didn't blame them, though that was their mother's making them write her name on the lavatory walls. Allie told her about that, kindly. But she had some sweet things with Allie. Once after school, with the sun still up, they drove along a country road and up an old lane and stopped in a leafy place where they could see Mount Judge, the town against the mountain, both dim in the distance, and he put his head in her lap, her sweater rolled up and her bra undone, and it was like a baby gently. Her bees, who called them her bees, not Allie, firmer and rounder then, more sensitive. His waiting wet mouth so happy and blind, and the birds making their warm noises overhead in the sunshine. Allie blabbed. He had to blab. She forgave him, but it made her wiser. She began the older ones. The mistake, if there was one, but why not? Why not was the question, and still held. Wondering if there was a mistake makes her tired just thinking. Lying there wet from swimming and seeing red through her eyelids, trying to move back through all that red, wondering if she was wrong. She was wise. With them being young did for being pretty, and them being older it wasn't such a rush. Boy, some bastards you think never, like their little contribution's the greatest thing the world's ever going to see if it ever gets here. But this one, what a nut! He had, though, that mildness. At least he saw you as being there. Boy, that first night when he said that so sort of proudly, hey, she didn't mind so much going under. In fact, it felt like she should. She forgave them all then. His face, all their faces gathered into a scarred blur, and it felt like she was falling under to something better than she was. But then after all, it turns out he's not that different. Hanging on you all depressed and lovey and then sick of you, or less than bored, really, when it's done. It's getting quicker and quicker, more like a habit. Really hurries now when he senses or she tells him she's lost it. Then she can just lie there and in a way listen, and it's soothing. But then she can't go to sleep afterward. Some nights he tries to bring her up, but she's just so sleepy and so heavy down there it's nothing. Sometimes she just wants to push him off and shake him and shout, I can't, you dope. Don't you know you're a father? But no, she mustn't tell him. Saying a word would make it final. It's just been one period, and the next is coming up in a day, maybe, so she'll have it, and then maybe she won't have anything. As much of a mess as it is, she doesn't know how happy that would make her really. At least this way she's doing something, sending those candy bars down. God, she isn't even sure she doesn't want it, because he wants it from the way he acts, with his damn no-stripper just a nice clean piece. She isn't even sure she didn't just deliberately bring it on by falling asleep under his arm, just to show the smug bastard. For the thing about him, he didn't mind her getting up when he was asleep and crawling into the lousy bathroom, just so long as he didn't have to watch anything or do anything. That was the thing about him. He just lived in his skin and didn't give a thought to the consequences of anything. Tell him about the candy bars and feeling sleepy. He'll probably get scared and off he'll go. Him and his good, clean piece and his cute little god and his cute little minister playing golf every Tuesday. For the damnedest thing about that minister was, before, Rabbit at least had the idea he was acting wrong, but with him he's got the idea he's Jesus Christ, out to save the world just by doing whatever comes into his head. I'd like to get hold of the bishop or whoever and tell him that minister of his is a menace. Filling poor Rabbit full of something nobody can get at, and even now, filling her ear, his sure, cocksure voice answers her question with an idle, remote smugness that infuriates her so the tears do come. I'll tell you, he says, when I ran from Janice, I made an interesting discovery. The tears bubble over her lids, and the awful taste of the pool water is sealed into her mouth. "If you have the guts to be yourself," he says, "other people will pay your price." Making awkward calls is agony for Eccles. At least anticipation of them is. Usually the dream is worse than the reality, so God has disposed the world. The actual presences of people are always bearable. Mrs. Springer is a plump, dark, small-boned woman with a gypsy look about her. Both the mother and the daughter have a sinister aura, but in the mother this ability to create uneasiness is a settled gift, thoroughly meshed into the strategies of middle-class life. With the daughter, it is a floating thing, useless and as dangerous to herself as to others. Eccles is relieved that Janice is out of the house. He feels guiltiest in her presence. She and Mrs. Fasnacht have gone into Brewer to a matinee of Some Like It Hot. Their two sons are in the Springers' backyard. Mrs. Springer takes him through the house to the screened-in porch, where she can keep an eye on the children. Her house is expensively but confusedly furnished. Each room seems to contain one more easy chair than necessary. To get from the front door to the back, they take a crooked path in the packed rooms. She leads him slowly. Both of her ankles are bound in elastic bandages. The pained littleness of her steps reinforces his illusion that her lower body is encased in a plaster cast. She gently lets herself sink onto the cushions of the porch glider and startles Eccles by kicking up her legs as with a squeak and sharp sway the glider takes her weight. The action seems to express childish pleasure. Her bald, pale calves stick out stiff, and her saddle shoes are for a moment lifted from the floor. These shoes are cracked and rounded, as if they'd been revolved in a damp tub for years. He sits down in a trickily hinged aluminum and plastic lawn chair. Through the porch screen at his side, he can see Nelson Angstrom and the slightly older Fasnacht boy play in the sun around a swing-slide sandbox set. "It's nice to see you," Mrs. Springer says. "It's been so long since you came last." "Just 3 weeks, isn't it?" he says. The chair presses against his back, and he hooks his heels around the pipe at the bottom to keep it from folding. It's been a busy time with the confirmation classes and the youth group deciding to have a softball team this year, and a series of deaths in the parish. His previous contacts with this woman have not disposed him to be apologetic. Her having so large a home offends his sense of place. He would like her better if this were the porch of a shanty. "Yes, I wouldn't want your job for the world. I enjoy it most of the time. They say you do. They say you're becoming quite an expert golf player." Oh, dear. And he thought she was relaxing. He thought for the moment they were on the porch of a shabby, peeling house, and she was a long-suffering, fat factory wife who had learned to take things as they came. That is what she looked like. That is easily what she might have been. Fred Springer, when he married her, was probably less likely-looking than Harry Angstrom when her daughter married him. He tries to imagine Harry 4 years ago and gets an attractive picture, tall, fair, famous in his school days, clever enough, a son of the morning. His air of confidence must have especially appealed to Janice. David and Michael. Husbands are a woeful lottery. He scratches his forehead and says, "Playing golf with someone is a good way to get to know him. That's what I try to do. You understand? Get to know people. I don't think you can lead someone to Christ unless you know him." "Well, now, what do you know about my son-in-law that I don't?" "That he's a good man, for one thing." "Good for what?" "Must you be good for something?" He tries to think. "Yes, I suppose you must." "Nelson, stop that this minute." She turns rigid in the glider, but does not rise to see what is making the boy cry. Eccles, sitting by the screen, can see. The Fasnacht boy stands by the swing, holding 2 red plastic trucks. Angstrom's son, some inches shorter, is batting with an open hand toward the bigger boy's chest, but does not quite dare to move forward a step and actually strike him. Young Fosnacht stands with the maddening invulnerability of the stupid, looking down at the flailing hand and contorted face of the smaller boy, without even a smile of satisfaction, a true scientist observing without passion the effect of his experiment. Mrs. Springer's voice leaps to a frantic hardness and cuts through the screen. "Did you hear me? I said stop that bawling." Nelson's face turns up toward the porch, and he tries to explain, Pilly, but just trying to describe the injustice gives it unbearable force. And as if struck from behind, he totters forward and slaps the thief's chest, and receives a mild shove that makes him sit on the ground. He rolls on his stomach and spins in the grass, revolved by his own incoherent kicking. Eccles' heart seems to twist with the child's body. He knows so well the propulsive power of a wrong, the way the mind batters against it, and each futile blow sucks the air emptier until it seems the whole frame of blood and bone must burst in a universe that can be such a vacuum. "The boy's taken his truck," he tells Mrs. Springer. "Well, let him get it himself," she says. "He must learn. I can't be getting up on these legs and running outside every minute. They've been at it like that all afternoon." "Billy!" The boy looks up in surprise toward Eccles' male voice. "Give it back." Billy considers this new evidence and hesitates indeterminately. "Now, please." Convinced, Billy walks over and pedantically drops the toy on his sobbing playmate's head. The new pain starts fresh grief in Nelson's throat, but seeing the truck on the grass beside his face chokes him. It takes him a moment to realize that the cause of his anguish is removed, and another moment to rein the emotion in his body. His great dry gasps as he rounds these corners seem to heave the sheet of trimmed grass and the sunshine itself. A wasp, bumping persistently against the screen, dips, and the aluminum chair under Eccles threatens to buckle, as if the wide world participates in Nelson's readjustment. "I don't know why the boy is such a sissy," Mrs. Springer says, "or maybe I do." Her sly adding this irks Eccles. "Why?" The purple skin under her eyes lifts and the corners of her mouth pull down in an appraising scowl. "Well, he's like his dad, spoiled. He's been made too much of and thinks the world owes him what he wants." It was the other boy. Nelson only wanted what was his. "Yes, and I suppose you think with his dad it was all Janice's fault." She pronounces Janice with German juice, Janice, making the girl seem thicker, darker, more precious and important than the tenuous, pathetic image in Eccles' mind. He wonders if she's not, after all, right, if he hasn't gone over to the other side. "No, I don't," he says. "I think his behavior has no justification. This isn't to say, though, that his behavior doesn't have reasons that, in part, your daughter could have controlled. With my church, I believe that we are all responsible beings, responsible for ourselves and for each other." The words, so well turned out, taste chalky in his mouth. He wishes she'd offer him something to drink. Spring is turning hot. The old gypsy sees his uncertainty. "Well, that's easy to say," she says. "It's not so easy, maybe, to take such a view if you're 9 months expecting and from a respectable home, and your husband's running around a few miles away with some bat, and everybody thinks it's the funniest thing since I don't know what." The word bat darts into the air like one, quick and black. "Nobody thinks it's funny, Mrs. Springer. You don't hear the talk I do. You don't see the smiles. Why, one woman as good as said to me the other day, if she can't keep him, she has no right to him. She had the gall to grin right in my face. I could have strangled her. I said to her, a man has duty too. It isn't all one way. It's women like her give men the ideas they have, that the world's just here for their pleasure. From the way you act, you half believe it too. Well, if the world is going to be full of Harry Angstroms, how much longer do you think they'll need your church?" She has sat up, and her dark eyes are lacquered by tears that do not fall. Her voice has risen in pitch and scratches at Eccles' face like a file. He feels covered with cuts. Her talk of the smiling gossip encircling this affair has surrounded him with a dreadful reality, like the reality of those 100 faces when on Sunday mornings at 11:30 he mounts the pulpit and the text flies from his mind and his notes dissolve into nonsense. He fumbles through his memory and manages to bring out, "I feel Harry is in some respects a special case. The only thing special about him is he doesn't care who he hurts or how much. Now, I mean no offense, Reverend Eccles, and I'm sure you've done your best considering how busy you are. But to be honest, I wish that first night I had called the police like I wanted to." He seems to hear that she is going to call the police to arrest him. Why not? With his white collar, he forges God's name on every word he speaks. He steals belief from the children he is supposed to be teaching. He murders faith in the minds of any who really listen to his babble. He commits fraud with every schooled cadence of the service, mouthing "Our Father" when his heart knows the real Father he is trying to please has been trying to please all his life. When he asks her, "What can the police do?" he seems to himself to mean, "What can they do to him?" "Well, I don't know, but more than play golf, I expect." I'm quite sure he will come back. "You've been saying that for 2 months. I still believe it. But he doesn't. He doesn't believe anything. Silence. "Could you—" Her voice is changed. It beseeches, "Bring me over that stool there in the corner. I have to get my legs up." When he blinks, his eyelids scratch. He rouses from his daze and gets the stool and takes it to her. Her broad shins in their green childlike socks lift meekly, and as he places the stool under the heels, his bending, with its echo of religious pamphlet paintings of Christ washing the feet of beggars, fits his body to receive a new flow of force. He straightens up and towers above her. She plucks at her skirt at the knees, tugging it down. "Thank you," she says. "That's a real relief for me." "I'm afraid it's the only sort of relief I've given you," he confesses, with a simplicity that he finds, and mocks himself for finding, admirable. "Ah," she sighs, "there's not much anybody can do, I guess." "No, there are things to do. Perhaps you're right about the police. The law provides protection for wives. Why not use it?" "Fred's against it." "Mr. Springer has good reasons. I don't mean merely business reasons. All the law can extract from Harry is financial support, and I don't think in this case that money is really the point. In fact, I'm not sure money is ever really the point." "That's easy to say if you've always had enough." He doesn't mind. It seemed to slip from her automatically, with less malice than lassitude. He is certain she wants to listen. "That may be. I don't know. But at any rate, my concern, everyone's concern for that matter, I'm sure, is with the general health of the situation. And if there's to be a true healing, it must be Harry and Janice who act. Really, no matter how much we want to help, no matter how much we try to do on the fringes, we're outside." In imitation of his father, he has clasped his hands behind him and turned his back on his auditor. Through the screen, he watches the one other who, perhaps, is not outside, Nelson, lead the Fasnacht boy across the lawn in pursuit of a neighbor's dog. Nelson's laughter spills from his head as his clumsy, tottering steps jar his body. The dog is old, reddish, small, and slow. The Fasnacht boy is puzzled, yet pleased by his friend's cry of, "Lion! Lion!" It interests Eccles to see that under conditions of peace, Angstrom's boy leads the other. The green air, seen through the muzzy screen, seems to vibrate with Nelson's noise. Eccles feels the situation. This constant, translucent outpour of selfless excitement must naturally now and then dam in the duller boy's narrower passages and produce a sullen backflow, a stubborn bullying act. He pities Nelson, who will be stranded in innocent surprise many times before he locates in himself the source of this strange reverse tide. It seems to Eccles that he himself was this way as a boy, always giving and always being suddenly swamped. The old dog's tail wags as the boys approach. It stops wagging and droops in an uncertain, wary arc when they surround it like hunters, crowing. Nelson reaches out and beats the dog's back with both hands. Eccles wants to shout. The dog might bite. He can't bear to watch. "Yes, but he drifts further away," Mrs. Springer is whining. "He's well off. He has no reason to come back if we don't give him one." Eccles sits down in the aluminum chair again. No, he'll come back, for the same reason he left. He's fastidious. He has to loop the loop. The world he's in now, the world of this girl in Brewer, won't continue to satisfy his fantasies. Just in seeing him from week to week, I've noticed a change. Well, not to hear Peggy Fosnacht tell it. She says she hears he's leading the life of Riley. I don't know how many women he has. Just one, I'm sure. The strange thing about Angstrom, he's by nature a domestic creature. Oh, dear. There is a flurry in the remote group. The boys run one way and the dog the other. Young Fosnacht halts, but Nelson keeps coming, his face stretched large by fright. Mrs. Springer hears his sobbing and says angrily, "Did they get Elsie to snap again? That dog must be sick in the head the way she keeps coming over here for more." Eccles jumps up. His chair collapses behind him and opens the screen door and runs down to meet Nelson in the sunshine. The boy shies from him. He grabs him. "Did the dog bite?" The boy's sobbing is paralyzed by this new fright, the man in black grabbing him. "Did Elsie bite you?" The Fosnacht boy hangs back at a safe distance. Nelson, unexpectedly solid and damp in Eccles' arms, releases great rippling gasps and begins to find his voice. Eccles shakes him to choke this threat of wailing, and, wild to make himself understood, with a quick lunge, clicks his teeth at the child's cheek. "Like that? Did the dog do that?" The boy's face goes rapt at the pantomime. "Like this," he says, and his fine little lip lifts from his teeth, and his nose wrinkles, and he jerks his head an inch to one side. "No bite?" Eccles insists, relaxing the grip of his arm. The little lip lifts again with that miniature fierceness, as if this tells the whole delightful story. Eccles feels mocked by a petite facial alertness that recalls, in Tilt and Cast, Harry's. Sobbing sweeps over Nelson again, and he breaks away and runs up the porch steps to his grandmother. Eccles stands up. In just that little time of squatting, the sun has started sweat on his black back. As he climbs the steps, he is troubled by something pathetic, something penetratingly touching in the memory of those tiny square teeth bared in that play snarl, the harmlessness, yet the reality of the instinct. The kitten's instinct to kill the spool with its cotton paws. He comes onto the porch to find the boy between his grandmother's legs, his face buried in her belly. In worming against her warmth, he has pulled her dress up from her knees, and their exposed breadth and pallor, undesired, laid bare defenselessly, superimposed upon the tiny, gamely, gritted teeth the boy exposed for him. This old whiteness, strained through this fine mesh, make a milk that feels to Eccles like his own blood. Strong, as if pity is, as he has been taught, not a helpless outcry, but a powerful tide that could purge the dust and rubble from every corner of the world, he steps forward and promises to the two bowed heads, "If he doesn't come back when she has the baby, then we'll get the law after him. There are laws, of course, quite a few." "Elsie snaps," Mrs. Springer says, "because you and Billy tease her." "Naughty Elsie," Nelson says. "Naughty Nelson," Mrs. Springer corrects. She lifts her face to Eccles and continues in the same correcting voice, "Yes, well, she's a week due now, and I don't see him running in." His moment of fondness for her has passed. He leaves her on the porch. Love never ends, he tells himself, using the Revised Standard Version. The King James has it that it never fails. Mrs. Springer's voice carries after him into the house. "Now, the next time I catch you teasing Elsie, you're going to get a whipping from your grandmom." "No, Mom," the child begs coyly, fright gone. Eccles thought he would find the kitchen and take a drink of water from the tap, but the kitchen slips by him in the jumbled rooms. He makes a mouth that works up saliva and swallows it as he leaves the stucco house. He gets into his Buick and drives down Joseph Street, and then a block along Jackson Road to the Angstroms' address. Mrs. Angstrom has four-cornered nostrils. Lozenge shape, they are set in a nose that is not so much large as extra anatomical. The little pieces of muscle and cartilage and bone are individually emphatic and divide the skin into many facets in the sharp light. Their interview takes place in her kitchen amid several burning light bulbs, burning in the middle of day. Their home is the dark side of a two-family brick house. She came to the door wearing suds on her red forearms and returns with him to a sink full of bloated shirts and underwear. She plunges at these things vigorously while they talk. She is a vigorous woman. Mrs. Springer's fat, soft, aching excess had puffed out from little bones, the bones once of a slip of a girl like Janice. Mrs. Angstrom's is packed on a great harsh frame. Harry's sighs must come from her side. Eccles is continually conscious of the long faucets, heraldic of cool water, shielded by her formidable body, but the opportunity never arises for a request so small. "I don't know why you come to me," she says. "Harold's 21. I have no control over him." "He hasn't been to see you?" "No, sir." She displays her profile above her left shoulder. "You've made him so ashamed, I suppose he's embarrassed, too." "He should be ashamed, don't you think?" "I wouldn't know why. I never wanted him to go with the girl in the first place. Just to look at her, you know she's 2/3 crazy." "Oh, now that's not true, is it?" "Not true? Why, the first thing that girl said to me was, 'Why don't I get a washing machine?' Comes into my kitchen, takes one look around, and starts telling me how to manage my life." "Surely you don't think she meant anything?" "No, she didn't mean anything. All she meant was, what was I doing living in such a run-down half-house when she came from a great big barn on Joseph Street with the kitchen full of gadgets? And wasn't I lucky to be fobbing off my boy on such a well-equipped little trick? I never liked that girl's eyes. They never met your face full on." She turns her face on Eccles, and, warned, he returns her stare. Beneath her misted spectacles, an old-fashioned type, circles of steel-rimmed glass in which the bifocal crescents catch a pinker tint of light, her arrogantly tilted nose displays its meaty, intricate underside. Her broad mouth is stretched slightly by a vague expectation. Eccles realizes that this woman is a humorist. The difficulty with humorists is that they will mix what they believe with what they don't, whichever seems likelier to win an effect. The strange thing is how much he likes her, though in a way she is plunging at him as roughly as she plunges the dirty clothes. But that's it. It's the same to her. Unlike Mrs. Springer, she doesn't really see him at all. Her confrontation is with the whole world, and secure under the breadth of her satire, he can say what he pleases. He bluntly defends Janice. The girl is shy. Shy? She wasn't too shy to get herself pregnant, so poor Hassie has to marry her when he could scarcely tuck his shirt-tail in. He was 21, as you say. Yes, well, years. Some die young, some are born old. Epigrams, everything. My, she is funny. Eccles laughs out loud. She doesn't acknowledge hearing him, and turns to her wash with furious seriousness. "About as shy as a snake," she says, "that girl. These little women are poison, mincing around with their sneaky eyes, getting everybody's sympathy. Well, she doesn't get mine. Let the men weep. To hear her father-in-law talk, she's the worst martyr since Joan of Arc." He laughs again. "But isn't she?" "Well, what does Mr. Angstrom think Harry should do?" "Crawl back. What else? He will, too, poor boy. He's just like his father underneath, all soft heart. I suppose that's why men rule the world. They're all heart." "That's an unusual view." "Is it? It's what they keep telling you in church. Men are all heart and women are all body. I don't know who's supposed to have the brains. God, I suppose." He smiles, wondering if the Lutheran Church gives everyone such ideas. Luther himself was a little like this, perhaps, overstating half-truths in a kind of comic wrath. The whole black Protestant paradox-thumping maybe begins there. Deep fundamental hopelessness in such a mind. Hubris in shoving the particular aside. Maybe he's forgotten much theology. It occurs to him that he should see Angstrom's pastor. Mrs. Angstrom picks up a dropped thread. "Now, my daughter Miriam is as old as the hills and always was. I've never worried about her. I remember on Sundays long ago when we'd walk out by the quarry, Harold was so afraid. He wasn't more than 12 then. He was so afraid she'd fall over the edge. I knew she wouldn't. You watch her. She won't marry out of pity like poor Hassie, and then have all the world jump on him for trying to get out." "I don't think the world has jumped on him. The girl's mother and I were just discussing that it seemed quite the contrary." "Don't you think it?" That girl gets no sympathy from me. She has everybody on her side from Eisenhower down. They'll talk him around. You'll talk him around. And there's another." The front door has opened with a softness she alone hears. Her husband comes into the kitchen wearing a white shirt and a tie, but with his fingernails ringed in black. He's a printer. He's as tall as his wife, but seems shorter. His mouth works self-deprecatorily over badly fitted false teeth. His nose is Harry's, a neat, smooth button. "How do you do, Father?" he says. Either he was raised as a Catholic or among Catholics. "Mr. Angstrom, it's nice to meet you." The man's hand has tough ridges, but a soft, dry palm. "We've been discussing your son." "I feel terrible about that." Eccles believes him. Earl Angstrom has a gray, ragged look. This business has blighted him. He thins his lips over his slipping teeth like a man with stomach trouble biting back gas. He is being nibbled from within. Color has washed from his hair and eyes like cheap ink. A straight man who has measured his life with the pica stick and locked the forms tight, he has returned in the morning and found the type scrambled. "He goes on and on about that girl as if she was the mother of Christ," Mrs. Angstrom says. "That's not true," Angstrom says mildly, and sits down in his white shirt at the porcelain kitchen table. 4 settings, year after year, have worn black blurs through the enamel. "I just don't see how Harry could make such a mess. As a boy, he was always so trim. He wasn't like other boys, sloppy. He was a neat worker." With raw, sudsy hands, Mrs. Angstrom has set about heating coffee for her husband. This small act of service seems to bring her into harmony with him. They begin, in the sudden way of old couples apparently at odds, to speak as one. "It was the Army," she says. "When he came back from Texas, he was a different boy." "He didn't want to come into the shop," Angstrom says. "He didn't want to get dirty." "Reverend Eccles, would you like some coffee?" Mrs. Angstrom asks. At last his chance. "No, thank you. What I would love, though, is a glass of water." "Just water with ice?" Anyway would be lovely." "Yes, Earl is right," she says. "People now say how lazy Hassie is, but he's not. He never was. When you'd be proud of his basketball in high school, you know, people would say, 'Yes, well, but he's so tall, it's easy for him.' But they didn't know how he had worked at that. Out back every evening, banging the ball way past dark. You wondered how he could see. From about 12 years old on," Angstrom says, "he was at that night and day. I put a pole up for him out back. The garage wasn't high enough. When he set his mind to something," Mrs. Angstrom says, "there was no stopping him." She yanks powerfully at the lever of the ice cube tray, and with a brilliant multiple crunch that sends chips sparkling, the cubes come loose. "He wanted to be best at that, and I honestly believe he was." "I know what you mean," Eccles says. "I play a little golf with him, and already he's become better than I am." She puts the cubes in a glass and holds the glass under a spigot and brings it to him. He tilts it at his lips, and Earl Angstrom's palely vehement voice wavers through the liquid. "Then he comes back from the Army, and all he cares about is chasing ass. He won't come work in the print shop because it'll get his fingernails dirty." Eccles lowers the glass, and Angstrom says full in his face across the table, "He's become the worst kind of brewer bum. If I could get my hands on him, Father, I'd try to thrash him if he killed me in the process." His ashen face bunches defiantly at the mouth. His colorless eyes swarm with glitter. "Your language, Earl," his wife says, setting coffee in a flowered cup on the table between his hands. He looks down into the steam and says, "Excuse me. When I think of what that boy's doing, my stomach does somersaults." Eccles lifts his glass and says "no" into it like a megaphone, and then drinks until no more water can be sucked from under the ice cubes that bump under his nose. He wipes the moisture from his mouth and says, "There's a great deal of goodness in your son. When I'm with him, it's rather unfortunate, really, I feel so cheerful I quite forget what the point of my seeing him is." He laughs, first at Mr., and failing here to rouse a smile, at Mrs. "This golf you play," Angstrom says. "What is the point? Why don't the girl's parents get the police after him? In my opinion, a good swift kick is what he needs." Eccles glances toward Mrs. Angstrom and feels the arch of his eyebrows like drying paste on his forehead. He didn't expect a minute ago to be looking toward her as an ally and toward this worn-out good man as a rather vulgar and disappointing foe. Mrs. Springer wants to, he tells Angstrom. The girl and her father want to wait. Don't talk nonsense, Earl, Mrs. Angstrom says. What does old Springer want with his name in the papers? The way you talk, you'd think poor Harry was your enemy. He is my enemy, Angstrom says. He touches the saucer from both sides with his stained fingertips. That night I spent walking the streets looking for him, he became my enemy. You can't talk. You didn't see the girl's face. What do I care about her face? You talk about tarts. They don't become ivory white saints in my book just by having a marriage license. That girl wanted Harry and got him with the only trick she knew, and now she's run out of tricks.